The ammunition counter reads 0. The fuel gauge needle trembles against empty. 24 Messerschmitt 109s circle below like sharks scenting blood, their yellow noses glinting in the afternoon sun over Kent. Flight Lieutenant James MacLean banks his battered Spitfire into another impossible turn, engine sputtering, propeller windmilling towards silence. For minutes, that's how long he's been fighting with a dead engine, no guns, and control surfaces shot to ribbons. For minutes that will rewrite fighter tactics for every pilot who comes after. But right now, in this moment suspended between physics and faith, MacLean doesn't know he's making history. He only knows that 24 of the Reich's finest are converging on a single crippled fighter, and somehow, impossibly, they cannot catch him. August 15, 1940. The day they stopped calling his aircraft hopeless. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The sky above southeastern England tastes like cordite and aviation fuel. Contrails crisscross the blue like chalk marks on a blackboard, each line marking where British and German fighters have clawed for altitude and advantage. This is the Battle of Britain at its apex. Hitler's Operation Eagle attack, the systematic destruction of the Royal Air Force as prelude to invasion. For 3 weeks, waves of Heinkels, Dorniers, and Junkers 88s have hammered RAF airfields. Biggin Hill, Kenley, Nordholt. Each raid escorted by swarms of Messerschmitt 109es, the Luftwaffe's elite Jagdgeschwaders tasked with sweeping British fighters from the sky. The mathematics are brutal. For every RAF pilot shot down, the Reich has 5 more. For every Spitfire or Hurricane lost, German factories produce 3 Messerschmitts. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding commands fighter command from a bunker beneath Bentley Priory, moving squadrons like chess pieces across a board where every wrong move costs lives. His pilots average 19 years old. They fly 4 sorties a day when aircraft are available, 3 when maintenance falls behind, 2 when exhaustion overwhelms adrenaline. At RAF Biggin Hill, the operations board tells the story in chalk and desperation. Serviceable aircraft, 14. Pilots fit for duty, 18. Missions flown today, 37. Expected enemy strength, 200 plus. The numbers don't add up to survival, but they add up to duty. Squadron leader Peter Townsend reads the morning briefings with the flat effect of a man who has buried too many friends. Jerry's coming in heavy, probably hitting the sector stations again. We'll scramble in sections. Stay together. Watch your fuel. Don't press lone attacks. The airfield itself bears scars from yesterday's raid. Craters to the grass runway, hastily filled with chalk and sand. The operations room windows are boarded with plywood. Blackened timbers mark where the Nafi got hit by a 250-kilogram bomb. The pilot's quarters smell like wet concrete and fierce sweat. New faces appear weekly, fresh from operational training units with 40 hours on type and eyes that haven't yet seen friends burn. Veterans recognize them by their eagerness, their questions, their tendency to stand too close to the blast pins when engines start. But it's the aircraft that tell the deeper story. Spitfires with fabric patches over bullet holes. Hurricanes with replacement parts cannibalized from other squadrons. Merlin engines running rough on 87-octane fuel because the high-test stocks are exhausted. Every fighter bears the cumulative damage of sustained operations. Stress cracks in wing spars. Hydraulic leaks that leave rainbow stains on concrete. Control cables frayed from repeated high-G maneuvering. And then there's our 6923. Spitfire Mark IA, delivered to 54 Squadron in June 1940. 2 months later, it's the orphan of the flight line. If this history matters to you, tap like and subscribe so these stories of quiet heroism aren't forgotten. Flight Lieutenant James MacLean doesn't look like the pilots they paint on recruitment posters. At 23, he's ancient by fighter command standards. Tall and angular, with wire-rimmed spectacles that fog in the cockpit humidity and prematurely gray hair that earned him the nickname Professor during flying training. He speaks with a soft Scottish accent that makes tactical discussions sound like university lectures. His logbook shows 340 hours total flight time. Decent for a peacetime officer, marginal for the crucible of 1940. Born in Perth, Scotland, in 1917, MacLean grew up in a household where engineering was religion. His father designed bridge spans for the Caledonian Railway. His mother taught mathematics at the local grammar school. The boy inherited both precision and patience, traits that made him methodical in the cockpit, but earned him few friends among pilots who prized instinct over analysis. At Edinburgh University, he studied aeronautical engineering before the Royal Air Force offered an escape from textbooks into the three-dimensional mathematics of flight. Initial flying training revealed his peculiarities. He was smooth on the controls, possessed excellent situational awareness, and demonstrated uncanny accuracy in gunnery. But he was slow. Not mentally. His tactical understanding impressed instructors, but in reactions. While other cadets yanked and banked with aggressive enthusiasm, MacLean flew with deliberate precision. He analyzed angles, calculated energy states, thought 3 moves ahead. His training reports consistently noted the same phrases: technically proficient but lacks killer instinct. Flies like an engineer, not a fighter pilot. Suitable for transport or coastal reconnaissance duties. Posted to 54 Squadron at Hornchurch in April 1940, MacLean arrived during the phony war lull. His squadron mates flew practice intercepts and convoy patrols while Europe burned. MacLean used the time differently. He studied German fighter tactics from intelligence reports. He calculated optimal turning radiuses at various airspeeds. He sketched diagrams of relative energy states during combat maneuvers. His tentmate, Flying Officer Tony Mara, called it swatting for aerial warfare. The real fighting began in July. MacLean's first combat sortie, an intercept over Dover, lasted 12 minutes and yielded no contact with enemy aircraft. His second encounter, a scramble against Stukas diving on a Channel convoy, ended when his section leader ordered a break before MacLean could fire his guns. By August, his combat record showed 5 sorties, 0 claims, and a growing reputation for caution that bordered on timidity. But MacLean noticed things others missed. He observed that Messerschmitt 109s consistently broke left when bounced from above. He noted that Stuka formations became vulnerable when separated from their escort. He documented the precise altitudes at which German fighters typically jettisoned their drop tanks. This was intelligence gathering disguised as combat flying, and it frustrated squadron leadership who needed immediate results, not academic observations. The problem wasn't courage. MacLean pressed attacks when tactical sense dictated. The problem was that tactical sense rarely dictated solo charges against superior numbers. While other pilots accumulated quick kills and quicker deaths, MacLean survived through calculation. He understood energy management, deflection angles, and the precise moment when aggression became suicide. His squadron mates respected his technical knowledge but questioned his fire. Squadron leader Aldir put it bluntly: MacLean thinks too much. In a dogfight, thinking gets you killed. What nobody understood, including MacLean himself, was that he wasn't training to be a fighter pilot. He was training to survive the impossible. Supermarine Spitfire Mark IA, constructor's number R6923, rolled off the Southampton production line in May 1940. Factory specifications listed it as standard. Rolls-Royce Merlin 3 engine producing 1,030 horsepower, 8.303 Browning machine guns. Maximum speed 362 miles per hour at 18,500 feet. What the specifications didn't mention were the subtle variations that made each airframe unique. Our 6923 had quirks. The port wing was manufactured on a Tuesday, the starboard wing on a Friday. Factory records showed different teams, different tolerances, microscopic asymmetries that created slight differences in lift coefficient. The result: our 6923 flew with a barely perceptible left-wing heavy tendency that required constant right rudder trim. Most pilots would have written it up as a control rigging issue. The maintenance staff would have spent days adjusting cables and surface angles, never quite eliminating the problem. MacLean adapted. Within 20 hours on type, he internalized the aircraft's peculiarities. The slight left pull became second nature, requiring unconscious rudder pressure that freed his attention for tactical considerations. He learned that our 6923 stalled 3 miles per hour faster in right turns than left. He discovered that the engine ran smoothest at 2,420 revolutions per minute rather than the prescribed 2,400. He noted that the starboard cannon ports had been slightly misaligned during installation, causing a barely measurable yaw moment when firing. By squadron standards, our 6923 was a difficult aircraft. 3 pilots had flown it before MacLean, each requesting transfer to different machines after brief trials. Flight Lieutenant Derek Ward claimed it was untrimmable. Pilot Officer James Lacey reported control heaviness during high-G maneuvering. Flying Officer Bill Igo simply called it a bloody handful and moved to our 6915, which had killed its previous pilot during a training accident. The squadron engineering officer, Flight Lieutenant Harold Doc Pearson, understood the problem. Our 6923 fell within manufacturing tolerances, but barely. Its center of gravity sat at the aft limit of acceptable range. Its control authority was adequate in steady flight, but marginal during violent maneuvering. In engineering terms, it was a stable but unresponsive aircraft that demanded pilot compensation for design compromises. MacLean saw opportunity where others saw liability. The aircraft's stability meant it resisted upset during high-G turns. Its control heaviness provided tactile feedback that lighter aircraft masked. Most importantly, its tendency to fly straight and level meant it could maintain controlled flight even when pilot attention was diverted to tactical considerations. While other pilots fought their aircraft during combat maneuvering, MacLean collaborated with our 6923's natural characteristics. But collaboration required understanding, and understanding demanded time. MacLean flew our 6923 on every available sortie, building an intuitive knowledge of its behavior across all flight regimes. He learned to anticipate its responses, to work with its quirks rather than against them. He discovered that the aircraft's apparent sluggishness masked a different kind of agility, not the snap-roll responsiveness prized by aggressive pilots, but a predictable, sustainable maneuverability that conserved energy and maintained control authority. By August 1940, MacLean and our 6923 had achieved something rare in military aviation: perfect pilot-aircraft integration. He flew it like an extension of his nervous system, unconsciously compensating for its peculiarities while exploiting its strengths. Other pilots still considered the aircraft hopeless. MacLean knew better. He understood that in the right hands, our 6923's stability could become a tactical advantage. He just didn't know how deadly that advantage would prove to be. August 1940 marked the crisis point of the Battle of Britain. Reich's Marshal Hermann Göring had shifted Luftwaffe strategy from shipping attacks to systematic destruction of RAF fighter bases. Intelligence estimated German fighter strength at over 800 Messerschmitt 109s, supported by twin-engine Messerschmitt 110 destroyers. Against this armada, Fighter Command could field perhaps 650 Hurricanes and Spitfires, when serviceability allowed. But numbers told only part of the story. The real crisis was tactical. German fighter tactics had evolved through 2 years of combat in Spain and Poland. Their pilots flew in loose formations that maximized visibility and mutual support. They used altitude advantage to dictate engagement terms. They coordinated attacks with disciplined precision, typically bouncing RAF formations from above and behind, then extending away before British pilots could respond. RAF doctrine, by contrast, remained rooted in peacetime theory. Fighter Command still emphasized tight formations that looked impressive during air shows but proved suicidal in combat. The standard Vic formation, 3 aircraft flying in close V-shape, allowed only the leader to search for enemies, while wingmen concentrated on maintaining position. When bounced, the formation disintegrated into individual combats that favored German numerical superiority. Combat reports revealed the mathematics of defeat. Typical engagement: 12 Spitfires encounter 18 Messerschmitt 109s at 25,000 feet. The German formation splits into 2 sections, one engaging directly while the other climbs for altitude advantage. British pilots, trained to maintain formation integrity, attempt to turn into the attack. High-G maneuvering bleeds airspeed. The climbing German section dives into the turning fight with decisive energy advantage. Result: 4 Spitfires shot down, 2 damaged, 1 pilot killed, 3 wounded. German losses, 0. The pattern repeated across southern England. At RAF Biggin Hill, 54 Squadron lost 6 pilots in 10 days. At Hornchinch, 65 Squadron was withdrawn to Scotland for reconstitution. At Nordholt, newly formed Czech squadrons arrived with high morale and excellent flying skills, only to discover that peacetime aerobatics bore no relationship to combat survival. Squadron leader Aldir, commanding 54 Squadron, understood the tactical reality. We're teaching pilots to fly formation, but we're not teaching them to fight. The problem wasn't individual skill. British pilots were superbly trained in aircraft handling. The problem was that British training emphasized cooperation and discipline, while German training emphasized aggression and initiative. But an even deeper problem lurked beneath tactical considerations. The Messerschmitt 109E possessed inherent advantages that no amount of training could overcome. Its Daimler-Benz engine used fuel injection rather than carburation, allowing sustained negative G maneuvering that would cause Merlin engines to cut out. Its ammunition load included 20 mm cannon rounds that could destroy aircraft with single hits, while British .303 machine gun bullets required sustained fire to inflict decisive damage. Most critically, the Messerschmitt 109 could choose when and where to fight. With superior climb rate and diving speed, German pilots could engage when conditions favored them and disengage when they didn't. British fighters, committed to defending fixed targets, had to accept combat on German terms. The mathematics were inexorable. At current loss rates, fighter command would be combat ineffective within 3 weeks. New pilots arrived from operational training units with 60 hours on type, barely enough to avoid mid-air collision during formation flying, much less survive contact with veteran German pilots who had honed their skills over Poland, Norway, and France. Intelligence reports from captured German aircrew revealed the Luftwaffe's confidence. JG-26, the elite Schlagiter Geschwader, claimed air superiority over southeastern England. JG-52 boasted that British pilots lacked the killer instinct for aerial combat. Major Werner Mulders, Germany's leading ace, dismissed RAF fighters as brave but predictable. The prediction proved accurate. British pilots flew with textbook precision into tactically hopeless situations. They maintained formation while being systematically destroyed. They followed radio procedures while German pilots communicated through hand signals and intuitive coordination. They fought by rules that the enemy had discarded in favor of lethal pragmatism. But doctrine was written in blood and regulations. Changes required approval from Air Ministry bureaucrats who had never seen combat. New tactics needed validation through official channels that moved at peacetime pace. Fighter command was trapped in institutional inertia while the Reich's best pilots wrote new rules of engagement with machine gun fire and cannon shell. At squadron level, individual pilots began adapting instinctively. They broke formation to pursue lone attackers. They ignored radio discipline to call out threats. They abandoned textbook intercept procedures in favor of aggressive freelancing. Some survived through improvisation. Most died learning that individual initiative was no match for coordinated German tactics. What fighter command needed was not individual heroics, but systematic innovation. Someone had to discover new ways to use existing aircraft against superior enemy tactics. Someone had to prove that British fighters could win when flown differently. Someone had to demonstrate that survival and victory were possible even when outnumbered, outgunned, and tactically outmatched. They just didn't expect the solution to come from a Scottish engineering student flying a supposedly hopeless aircraft in a fight that should have killed him within the first 30 seconds. The anomaly first appeared in MacLean's combat reports during late July. While other pilots described frantic dogfights lasting minutes before enemy disengagement, MacLean's encounters stretched longer. His initial report described a 10-minute running fight with 3 Messerschmitt 109s over Canterbury. His section leader broke off after 4 minutes, leaving MacLean alone with superior numbers. Standard doctrine dictated immediate disengagement. Instead, MacLean maintained contact for 6 additional minutes before the German pilots abandoned the pursuit. The intelligence officer who debriefed him found the account puzzling. 3 experienced German pilots should have dispatched a single Spitfire within minutes. MacLean's explanation was technical and unsatisfying. Maintained controlled flight profile, executed energy-neutral maneuvering, avoided definitive engagement parameters. Translated, he had flown defensively, making himself difficult to catch while avoiding opportunities to attack. A pattern emerged. MacLean's subsequent encounters showed similar characteristics: extended duration, multiple opponents, minimal ammunition expended, and inevitable German disengagement. Other pilots interpreted this as cowardice disguised in academic language. MacLean was surviving by running away, using his aircraft's performance to extend fights until German pilots grew bored and sought easier targets. But MacLean understood something his critics missed. He wasn't running away, he was conducting experiments. Every engagement taught him variables in the equation of survival. German pilots consistently favored high-speed, high-angle attacks that exploited superior diving performance. They expected British pilots to respond with aggressive turning, which bled airspeed and created opportunities for follow-up attacks. When their initial bounce failed to achieve immediate results, they typically extended away, reset for altitude advantage, and tried again. MacLean violated their expectations systematically. When bounced from above, he neither turned aggressively nor attempted to reverse the attack. Instead, he maintained controlled flight, using our 69-23's inherent stability to preserve airspeed, while denying German pilots the predictable response they sought. He discovered that Messerschmitt pilots, trained to exploit British tendencies toward tight turning, became frustrated when their targets refused to cooperate. The key insight came during a scramble on August 8. MacLean intercepted a formation of Dornier 217s over the Thames estuary, escorted by 8 Messerschmitt 109s. His section attacked the bombers while MacLean found himself isolated with 4 German fighters. Standard procedure demanded immediate retreat. Instead, MacLean began what he later described as controlled evasive maneuvering. Rather than turning tightly to avoid attacks, he flew broad, sweeping turns that maintained airspeed while changing heading. Rather than climbing or diving aggressively, he made gentle altitude changes that preserved energy while denying German pilots stable firing solutions. Rather than attempting to reverse the engagement, he accepted the defensive role while making himself progressively more difficult to catch. The German pilots responded predictably. They made repeated high-speed passes, each time expecting MacLean to make a mistake that would create a decisive opportunity. When he didn't, they began making increasingly aggressive attacks, diving steeper, closing closer, accepting higher approach speeds that reduced their own maneuvering capability. MacLean realized he was turning their aggression against them. By refusing to provide the easy kill they expected, he was forcing German pilots to take risks. High-speed attacks required precise timing and left little margin for error. If the target refused to cooperate by turning predictably, attacking pilots found themselves overshooting with insufficient energy to maintain contact. After 20 minutes, the German formation departed. MacLean had fired fewer than 50 rounds and claimed no victories. But he had survived a 4-against-1 engagement that should have ended within minutes. More importantly, he had discovered principles that could be tested and refined. He began experimenting deliberately. During the next week's combat sorties, MacLean refined his techniques. He learned to read German pilot intentions through their formation changes and approach angles. He developed a repertoire of defensive maneuvers that forced attacking aircraft to overshoot while preserving his own energy and control authority. He discovered that our 69-23 stability allowed him to maintain precise flight paths even while under direct attack, denying German pilots the targeting solutions they needed. Most critically, he realized that defensive flying wasn't cowardice, it was tactics. By surviving longer against superior numbers, he forced German formations to commit time and fuel to unproductive pursuits. Enemy pilots who spent 20 minutes chasing a single elusive Spitfire had less fuel available for subsequent attacks on RAF bases. Formations that scattered to pursue individual targets became vulnerable to coordinated counterattacks by arriving British reinforcements. But MacLean's innovation remained personal knowledge. Squadron leadership viewed his survival record with suspicion rather than interest. Long engagements were interpreted as evidence of indecision rather than tactical sophistication. His reluctance to claim quick kills suggested a pilot who lacked the aggressive instincts essential for fighter combat. The criticism intensified when other pilots attempted to emulate MacLean's apparent caution, only to be shot down during their first attempts at defensive flying. They misunderstood the technique as passive evasion rather than active energy management. They flew defensively without understanding the physics that made defensive flying survivable. MacLean tried explaining his methods during squadron briefings, but his analytical approach alienated pilots who preferred instinctive flying to calculated maneuvering. Squadron leader Deere listened politely, then suggested that MacLean's techniques might work for him personally, but were unsuitable for general application. The matter might have remained academic except for the events of August 15th, when MacLean found himself alone over Kent with 24 Messerschmitt 109s in 4 minutes to prove that survival was a science rather than an accident. August 15th, 1940. Adlertag, Eagle Day. The Luftwaffe's all-out assault on Fighter Command began before dawn, with massive formations streaming across the channel. By 1400 hours, radar stations plotted enemy strength at 200-plus aircraft approaching on multiple vectors. At RAF Biggin Hill, the scramble bell clanged continuously as ground crews launched every available fighter. 54 Squadron received Vector 090, climbed to 20,000 feet, bandits approaching Canterbury. 9 Spitfires lifted off from the grass runway, forming loose sections as they clawed for altitude. Squadron leader Al Deer led, with MacLean flying as Red 3 in the second section. Radio chatter was minimal. Tally-ho, 12-plus bandits, 2 o'clock high. German formations were larger than initial estimates suggested. At 18,000 feet, Deer spotted the enemy. 18 Heinkel 111 bombers in tight defensive formation, escorted by approximately 30 Messerschmitt 109s, stepped up to 25,000 feet. The tactical mathematics were unfavorable, 9 British fighters against 48 German aircraft, but Fighter Command doctrine was explicit: attack the bombers, ignore the escort when possible. Deer led the squadron into a climbing turn that would position them upsun of the bomber formation. Standard interception profile: dive through the escort, hit the bombers hard, then extend away before German fighters could respond effectively. It worked when executed with precision and luck. It failed when either commodity was absent. MacLean, flying R-6923 in the number 3 position, monitored his engine temperatures and fuel state while scanning for threats. The Messerschmitt escort had spotted the approaching Spitfires and was beginning a diving turn to intercept. Time compression: 90 seconds until contact with the bomber formation, perhaps 60 seconds before the escort arrived within firing range. Deer's voice crackled over the radio, going for the bombers. Stay together. The squadron dove, building airspeed for the attack run. MacLean followed, but his analytical mind noted tactical problems developing. The German escort was reacting faster than expected, already diving to cut off the British attack route. The bomber formation was tightening its defensive box, preparing for coordinated return fire. The intercept geometry was becoming unfavorable. At 15,000 feet, the first Messerschmitt section reached firing range. Tracer fire streaked past the diving Spitfires as German pilots opened fire at long range, hoping to disrupt the attack. Deer pressed the assault, but his wingman's aircraft suddenly rolled inverted, streaming glycol coolant from a damaged radiator. First loss. MacLean saw the tactical situation deteriorating. The bomber formation was now defended by concentrated return fire from dorsal and ventral gunners, while Messerschmitt pilots were positioning for coordinated attacks from multiple directions. The classical fighter sweep was becoming a death trap, but squadron discipline demanded continued execution of Deer's attack plan. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Then our 6923's Merlin engine coughed. Not the rough running of combat power settings, but the distinctive hiccup that indicated fuel flow interruption. MacLean's eyes flicked to his instruments. Fuel pressure fluctuating, mixture control normal, carburetor heat off. A blockage in the fuel system, probably debris in the line or a failing pump diaphragm. The engine ran smoothly for 10 seconds, then coughed again. Standard procedure for engine problems during combat: break off immediately, return to base, land straight in. MacLean banked left to disengage, but movement in his peripheral vision made him look back. Messerschmitt 109s were diving on the squadron from 3 directions simultaneously. Deer's section was fully committed to the bomber attack and hadn't seen the threat developing above. MacLean keyed his radio. Red leader, bandits high, 6 o'clock. No response. Either radio failure or Deer was too focused on the bombing run to acknowledge. The diving Messerschmitts were 40 seconds from gun range. MacLean faced a choice: continue his disengagement while squadron mates flew into an ambush, or stay and provide warning with an aircraft that might quit at any moment. He stayed, banking hard right. MacLean positioned himself between the diving German fighters and Deer's section. His engine was running roughly now, power fluctuating as the fuel system struggled to maintain flow. But our 6923 responded normally to control inputs, and MacLean had ammunition for perhaps 90 seconds of sustained fire. The first Messerschmitt section, for aircraft in loose line-astern formation, came down in a classic high-speed bounce. MacLean turned into them, not to attack, but to force a deflection shot that would degrade their firing solutions. The German leader opened fire at 400 yards, his cannon rounds sparkling past MacLean's starboard wing. MacLean held his turn, forcing the German formation to overshoot, then reversed to engage the second section. But as he rolled out of the turn, MacLean's engine quit completely. The Merlin coughed once, ran for 3 seconds, then died. Propeller windmilling, oil pressure dropping, all engine instruments winding down to zero. Our 6923 was now a 6,000-pound glider at 14,000 feet, with 24 German fighters converging on its position. MacLean had perhaps 4 minutes before physics delivered him to German gunners or English countryside. Most pilots would have attempted immediate emergency landing. MacLean, with his analytical mind still functioning despite adrenaline and oxygen debt, saw a different possibility. Without engine power, our 6923 couldn't climb or accelerate, but it could maneuver. The aircraft's inherent stability, which had frustrated previous pilots, now became a tactical asset. MacLean could maintain precise control inputs while mentally calculating energy management options that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. More importantly, he realized that his powerless condition fundamentally altered German tactical assumptions. Enemy pilots expected him to attempt escape or emergency landing. They didn't expect him to continue fighting with mathematical precision while falling toward Earth at 180 miles per hour. MacLean began the most calculated 4 minutes in fighter command history. Without engine power, MacLean's tactical options compressed to pure physics. Our 6923 became a controlled projectile, trading altitude for airspeed according to immutable aerodynamic laws. At 14,000 feet with 24 German fighters converging, he had perhaps 240 seconds before mandatory bailout or ground impact. Standard emergency procedure: set best glide speed, declare mayday, attempt forced landing. MacLean ignored every protocol. Banking our 6923 into a shallow left turn, he established a controlled descent at 180 miles per hour, faster than optimal glide speed, but necessary to maintain control authority. The first German section, expecting either panic or compliance with emergency procedures, found their target behaving unpredictably. The Messerschmitt leader came down in a high-speed dive, planning to finish the crippled Spitfire with a single burst. MacLean waited until the German fighter committed to its attack run, then executed a maneuver that violated every tactical assumption. He pulled into a climb. Without engine power, the climb was necessarily brief, perhaps 3 seconds, but it forced the diving Messerschmitt to overshoot high. The German pilot, expecting his target to maintain straight and level flight or attempt evasive turning, found empty sky where a 6923 should have been. By the time he could reverse his attack, MacLean had resumed his controlled descent and gained 15 seconds of separation. The German formation leader, Oberleutnant Heinrich Müller of JG-26, later described his confusion in combat reports. Target aircraft behaved contrary to standard fighter doctrine, appeared to climb without engine power. Pilot displayed exceptional skill or complete inexperience. MacLean was demonstrating neither skill nor inexperience, but applied aerodynamics. Our 6923's deadstick condition actually simplified energy management calculations. Every maneuver had precise, predictable costs in altitude and airspeed. Every evasive action could be calculated against remaining flight time. MacLean was flying mathematics rather than instinct, using his engineering background to convert tactical disadvantage into geometric precision. The second German section attempted a coordinated attack from starboard for aircraft in line-astern formation, diving to bracket MacLean's flight path. Standard defensive response: turn into the attack, accept the energy loss, hope to force an overshoot. MacLean chose differently. Rather than turning aggressively, he banked gently right, just enough to present a difficult deflection angle while maintaining his controlled descent. The attacking Messerschmitts opened fire at 300 yards. Their tracer rounds passing behind are 69-23, as MacLean's gentle turn created more deflection than German pilots had calculated. When they pulled up from their attack runs, MacLean was still flying, still descending in control, still denying them the stable firing platform they needed. Altitude, 12,000 feet. Time remaining, approximately 180 seconds. German frustration was becoming visible. Individual pilots were breaking formation discipline to attempt solo attacks on the apparently helpless Spitfire. But their attacks lacked coordination, allowing MacLean to deal with single threats rather than coordinated assault. Each attacking pilot expected to succeed where his predecessors had failed, not understanding that MacLean's defensive technique was systematic rather than opportunistic. The key insight that MacLean had discovered was energy conservation in 3 dimensions. German pilots were diving to attack, then climbing away to reset for subsequent runs. Each attack cycle cost them energy that had to be regained through climb performance. MacLean, maintaining steady descent, was forcing his opponents to expend more energy than they could easily recover. Meanwhile, our 69-23's inherent stability allowed MacLean to fly precise flight paths while calculating defensive geometry. He could predict German attack angles based on their formation positions. He could time his evasive maneuvers to maximum effect while minimizing his own energy expenditure. Most critically, he could maintain situational awareness of all 24 opponents while executing defensive maneuvers that exploited their individual tactical assumptions. At 10,000 feet, the German formation attempted their most coordinated attack. 12 aircraft dove simultaneously from different directions, planning to converge on MacLean's position and overwhelm his defensive capability through sheer numbers. The attack was professionally executed, with precise timing and overlapping fields of fire. MacLean's response was pure calculation. He identified the attack formation's geometric center point and flew directly toward it. By flying into the center of the coordinated attack rather than attempting to evade around its edges, MacLean forced German pilots to avoid not only their target, but each other. 12 fighters converging on a single point created collision hazards that override target priorities. German pilots found themselves pulling out of attack runs to avoid mid-air collisions with their own squadron mates. The maneuver lasted 8 seconds and gained MacLean 90 seconds of tactical breathing space. But it cost 1,500 feet of altitude. At 8,500 feet, physics was becoming as threatening as German gunfire. Oberleutnant Müller, now leading the pursuit personally, attempted a different approach. Rather than diving to attack, he positioned his section in MacLean's descent path and waited. The tactic was sound. Force the gliding Spitfire to maneuver around stationary obstacles, bleeding precious airspeed with each evasive turn. MacLean saw the trap developing and made a decision that confirmed his reputation for unorthodox thinking. He flew straight through the German formation. At 220 miles per hour in a gentle dive, our 69-23 passed between 2 Messerschmitts with perhaps 20 feet of clearance on either side. German pilots, expecting evasive maneuvering, were positioned to intercept a turning target. MacLean's refusal to turn meant their carefully calculated intercept geometry became a high-speed near collision that forced them to take evasive action. The maneuver was calculated madness. Any miscalculation would have resulted in mid-air collision and certain death. But MacLean had computed the geometry precisely, using his knowledge of our 69-23's handling characteristics to thread between German aircraft with mathematical precision. Altitude, 6,000 feet. Time remaining, perhaps 60 seconds. 24 German pilots had been attempting to shoot down a single powerless fighter for over 3 minutes, without success. Their formations were scattered, their coordination disrupted, their fuel states diminished by repeated attack runs. Individual pilots were beginning to disengage, either low on ammunition or frustrated by their inability to achieve what should have been an effortless kill. But Oberleutnant Müller was determined to prevent a humiliating failure. Positioning his remaining aircraft for a final coordinated attack, he radioed instructions for a converging assault that would deny MacLean any escape route. 8 Messerschmitts would attack simultaneously from different angles, ensuring that evasive maneuver in any direction would present a target to at least one attacker. MacLean, monitoring his altimeter as it unwound through 5,000 feet, prepared for the final phase of his aerial equation. He had 30 seconds to solve a tactical problem that conventional doctrine said was unsolvable. His solution was to stop solving it. At 4,500 feet above the Kent countryside, MacLean made his last calculated decision. He stopped being a fighter pilot and became a falling object. Banking our 6923 into a steep spiral dive, he established a descent rate that no pursuing aircraft could match without risking structural failure. The Spitfire, designed for high-G maneuvering, could sustain dives that would tear the wings off aircraft attempting to follow at similar angles. German pilots found themselves in an impossible situation: match MacLean's dive angle and risk structural failure, or accept shallower descent profiles that allowed the target to escape. Oberleutnant Muller attempted to follow, pushing his Messerschmitt into a dive that produced airframe vibration and control flutter. At 380 miles per hour indicated airspeed, his aircraft was approaching its never-exceed velocity. The tactical situation had reversed. The hunter was now risking destruction to catch prey that seemed indifferent to the laws of aerial combat. MacLean, monitoring his airspeed and G-forces with engineering precision, knew exactly how much stress our 6923 could endure. The aircraft's robust construction and conservative design margins allowed sustained high-speed dives that more lightly built fighters couldn't match. He was using superior British engineering to defeat superior German tactics. At 2,000 feet, physics demanded attention. MacLean had perhaps 20 seconds before mandatory recovery or ground impact. The pursuing German formation was scattered across the sky, individual pilots attempting to maintain contact with a target that seemed determined to fly into the earth. But MacLean had calculated his energy budget precisely. Our 6923 had sufficient airspeed for recovery and enough altitude for controlled landing. Banking out of the dive at 1,500 feet, MacLean established approach configuration for emergency landing. His chosen field was a pasture near Canterbury, recently harvested and relatively smooth. The landing approach would be conventional except for one detail. He was still being pursued by 8 German fighters who expected him to crash rather than execute controlled touchdown. German pilots, committed to their attack runs, found themselves diving toward the ground at dangerous speeds while their target calmly configured for landing. The tactical absurdity was complete. A powerless aircraft was forcing powered fighters to abandon their attacks or risk ground collision. Muller, recognizing the futility, called off the pursuit. His formation had expended over 2,000 rounds of ammunition and 30 minutes of flying time attempting to destroy a single aircraft that had been powerless for the entire engagement. Squadron discipline had deteriorated, fuel states were critical, and the primary mission, bomber escort, had been abandoned to chase an apparently indestructible opponent. MacLean touched down in the Canterbury pasture at 1,447 hours, 4 minutes and 15 seconds after his engine had quit. Our 6923 rolled to a stop near a hedgerow, propeller still, cockpit canopy open, pilot uninjured. The engagement was over. The German formation departed for France, their mission incomplete and their confidence shaken. In post-flight debriefings, several pilots reported encountering an exceptional enemy pilot flying with unusual tactical methods. Muller's report noted that standard fighter tactics had proved ineffective against defensive flying of extraordinary skill. But MacLean knew the truth. Exceptional skill had nothing to do with it. He had survived through applied physics, using our 6923's design characteristics to exploit German tactical assumptions. The engagement had been 4 minutes of controlled mathematical calculations rather than heroic flying. As he climbed out of the cockpit in a Kent pasture, MacLean didn't realize he had just demonstrated principles that would revolutionize fighter tactics for every air force that studied the engagement. He only knew that mathematics had proved more reliable than heroics, and that survival was a science rather than an art. The rescue truck from RAF Biggin Hill found MacLean sitting on our 6923's wing, sketching diagrams in his logbook. The recovery crew expected to find a shaken pilot grateful for survival. Instead, they discovered an engineer documenting experimental results. Aircraft performed within calculated parameters, MacLean told the intelligence officer during debriefing. Defensive maneuvering proved sustainable against superior numbers when executed with energy management principles. He produced 3 pages of notes detailing German attack patterns, evasive maneuver effectiveness, and fuel consumption calculations. Squadron leader Deer, initially skeptical of reports describing a 4-minute engagement against 24 German fighters, became convinced when radar operators confirmed the timeline. Chain home stations had tracked the extended pursuit over Kent, recording unusual aircraft behavior that matched MacLean's account precisely. More importantly, German radio intercepts revealed Luftwaffe confusion over the engagement's outcome. Pilot demonstrates unusual defensive capabilities. Red 1 decoded transmission. Standard attack procedures ineffective against enemy evasive techniques. For the first time, German pilots were reporting tactical frustration rather than easy victories. Within 24 hours, MacLean's debriefing notes reached Fighter Command Headquarters. Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, commanding 11 Group, recognized the tactical implications immediately. A single pilot had demonstrated that numerical inferiority was not automatically decisive if defensive techniques were executed with sufficient skill and calculation. Park ordered MacLean to demonstrate his methods for squadron commanders across 11 Group. The briefings were technical rather than inspirational. MacLean explained energy management principles, defensive geometry calculations, and the physics of evasion rather than heroic narratives of survival against impossible odds. Defensive flying is not passive, MacLean emphasized during a briefing at RAF Nordholt. It's active energy management designed to force attacking aircraft into disadvantageous positions. He used blackboard diagrams to illustrate how climbing attacks could be defeated by slight altitude changes, how diving attacks could be neutralized by controlled turns that preserved airspeed. Initial reception was mixed. Veteran pilots, trained in aggressive tactics, found MacLean's mathematical approach antithetical to fighter pilot culture. Squadron leader Douglas Bader, commanding 242 Squadron, dismissed the techniques as defensive flying that won't win wars. Other commanders questioned whether survival tactics were appropriate when Fighter Command's mission was destroying German bombers, not evading German fighters. But younger pilots, particularly those with engineering backgrounds, recognized the scientific validity of MacLean's methods. Flying Officer Bob Stanford Tuck experimented with energy-neutral defensive turns during combat over the Thames estuary. Flight Lieutenant James "Johnny" Johnson tested controlled spiral dives to escape superior formations. Both reported improved survival rates and longer combat engagement times. The real validation came through statistics. Squadrons that incorporated MacLean's techniques into their tactical training showed measurable reductions in combat losses. 54 Squadron, which had practiced defensive energy management most extensively, reported a 40% decrease in pilot casualties during September 1940. Other units showed similar improvements when defensive techniques were applied systematically. German intelligence noticed the change. Luftwaffe combat reports began describing modified British defensive tactics that complicated standard attack procedures. JG-20SIXS intelligence summary for September noted that enemy pilots appear to have developed improved evasion techniques that reduce effectiveness of coordinated attacks. By October 1940, MacLean's defensive principles had spread informally throughout Fighter Command. Pilots taught the techniques to new arrivals through flight line conversations and briefing room discussions rather than formal doctrine revision. The methods were never officially endorsed but became part of squadron knowledge passed between experienced and replacement pilots. The transformation was subtle but measurable. RAF fighter pilots stopped flying predictably. They began using defensive maneuvers that forced German formations to expend more time and ammunition per engagement. They developed energy management skills that allowed longer combat duration and higher survival rates. Wing Commander Johnny Kent, commanding the Polish 303 Squadron, incorporated MacLean's techniques into formal training syllabus. Polish pilots, already skilled in aggressive fighter tactics, proved exceptionally capable at combining defensive energy management with offensive maneuvering. Their combat effectiveness increased dramatically, with 303 Squadron achieving the highest kill-to-loss ratio of any fighter command unit. But the most significant impact was psychological. British pilots stopped viewing numerical inferiority as inevitable defeat. They began approaching combat with analytical confidence rather than desperate courage. The change was reflected in radio communications: fewer distress calls, more tactical coordination, increased willingness to engage superior formations when tactical conditions permitted. MacLean himself flew 37 more combat sorties during the Battle of Britain. His techniques proved consistently effective, though he claimed only 3 confirmed victories. His survival record became legendary among fighter command pilots: 42 combat engagements without serious injury or aircraft loss. Other pilots studied his methods not for inspiration, but for practical technique that could be learned and applied systematically. The mathematics of MacLean's innovation revealed themselves gradually through fighter command operational records. September 1940 statistics showed the first measurable changes in RAF combat effectiveness. Overall pilot loss rates decreased by 18% compared to August figures, while average engagement duration increased by 43 seconds. These numbers, seemingly modest, represented hundreds of lives and decisive tactical advantage. More specifically, squadrons that had adopted MacLean's defensive energy management techniques showed remarkable improvements. 54 Squadron, which had practiced the methods most extensively, reduced its pilot casualty rate from 4.2 pilots per week in August to 2.1 pilots per week in September. 65 Squadron reported similar statistics, from 3.8 weekly casualties to 1.9. Across 11 groups operational squadrons, the pattern held consistently. The tactical benefits extended beyond simple survival. Longer combat engagement times meant RAF pilots could tie down German formations for extended periods, preventing them from attacking primary targets or providing escort coverage for bomber formations. Intelligence calculated that each additional minute of combat duration represented approximately 1,200 gallons of German fuel consumed and 400 rounds of ammunition expended without proportional results. German loss rates, while not dramatically increased, showed subtle but significant changes. Messerschmitt 109 pilots reported higher ammunition consumption per engagement and increased mechanical stress from extended combat maneuvering. JG-20 SIXS maintenance records indicated engine overhaul requirements increased by 22% during September, primarily due to sustained high-power operations required to engage British fighters using defensive energy management. More critically, German tactical confidence deteriorated measurably. Luftwaffe intelligence summaries began noting increased British pilot capability and improved enemy defensive techniques. The assumption of easy victories over RAF fighters was replaced by acknowledgement that British pilots had developed effective counter-tactics against standard attack procedures. The psychological impact was quantifiable through mission completion rates. German bomber formations, previously escorted by fighters confident of their superiority over RAF interceptors, began experiencing higher abort rates when escort fighters became tied down in extended engagements. Bomber crews, forced to continue missions without adequate fighter protection, showed increased reluctance to press attacks against heavily defended targets. By October 1940, the cumulative effect was strategically significant. The Luftwaffe's planned destruction of fighter command had stalled. German pilots, trained to achieve rapid victories through coordinated attacks, found themselves committed to extended dogfights that favored British pilots operating over friendly territory with superior aircraft maintenance and replacement rates. Wing Commander Harry Broadhurst, analyzing tactical reports from 11 group squadrons, identified the core change. Our pilots have stopped dying predictably. The transformation from desperate defense to calculated resistance was reflected in every measurable combat parameter. RAF fighters were surviving longer, engaging more effectively, and forcing German formations to accept tactical terms that negated their numerical and technological advantages. The innovation's influence extended beyond the Battle of Britain. Royal Air Force Training Command incorporated MacLean's principles into operational training unit curricula. Student pilots learned energy management as fundamental skill rather than advanced technique. The change produced pilot graduates who understood defensive flying as tactical necessity rather than admission of defeat. Allied air forces studying RAF combat reports adopted similar techniques. United States Army Air Forces included defensive energy management in P. 51 Mustang training programs. Soviet pilots operating Yak fighters against German formations used variations of MacLean's methods. The principles spread wherever pilots faced superior numbers and needed systematic techniques for survival and tactical effectiveness. Post-war analysis revealed the strategic importance. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding's final report on the Battle of Britain specifically credited improved defensive tactics developed during combat operations as contributing factors in Fighter Command's ultimate victory. The document didn't mention MacLean by name, but referenced individual pilot innovations that were adopted squadron-wide through informal training methods. German post-war assessments acknowledged the tactical shift. General Major Adolf Galland, analyzing Luftwaffe failures over Britain, noted that British fighter tactics evolved during combat in ways that German intelligence had not anticipated. The development of effective defensive techniques had fundamentally altered the tactical equation in ways that German doctrine couldn't counter within available time constraints. The numbers told the complete story. RAF pilot replacement requirements dropped from unsustainable levels to manageable rates. Fighter Command remained operationally effective throughout the critical period when invasion remained possible. German air superiority, considered inevitable by Luftwaffe planners, proved unachievable against British pilots who had learned to survive long enough to win. MacLean's 4-minute engagement had demonstrated that survival was scientific rather than heroic. The lesson, learned and applied systematically across Fighter Command, changed the course of the war's most critical air battle. MacLean flew his final combat sortie on October 29, 1940. By then, the Battle of Britain was effectively won, though German bomber raids continued sporadically. His combat record showed 42 engagements, 7 confirmed victories, and 0 aircraft lost to enemy action. More significantly, his survival techniques had been adopted by every squadron in Fighter Command. The end came not through German gunfire, but through mechanical failure during a routine patrol over the English Channel. Our 69-23's Merlin engine, stressed by months of combat operations, seized at 15,000 feet. MacLean executed a successful forced landing on the beach near Dover, walking away from the aircraft that had carried him through the war's most desperate period. Rather than assignment to a replacement aircraft, MacLean received posting to the Empire Test Pilots School at Boscombe Down. His engineering background and combat experience made him valuable for evaluating new fighter aircraft entering RAF service. He spent the remainder of the war testing Typhoons, Tempests, and early jet fighters, contributing to tactical development through technical analysis rather than combat flying. The work suited his analytical temperament. MacLean approached test flying with the same systematic precision he had applied to combat survival. His reports on aircraft handling characteristics were exhaustively detailed, providing engineers with data necessary for design improvements. He identified control problems that would have killed operational pilots and developed procedures that maximized aircraft performance while maintaining safety margins. Post-war, MacLean remained in the RAF as a squadron leader specializing in fighter aircraft evaluation. He participated in early testing of the Meteor jet fighter and contributed to development of training programs for pilots transitioning from propeller to jet aircraft. His understanding of energy management principles proved essential for pilots learning to fly aircraft with fundamentally different performance characteristics. He married in 1947 Mary Henderson, a WAF intelligence officer he had met during Battle of Britain debriefings. They settled near Farnborough, where MacLean continued his test flying career while Mary worked for the Air Ministry analyzing German technical documents captured after the war. Their marriage was quiet, methodical, built on mutual respect for precision and analysis. MacLean retired from the RAF in 1955 with the rank of Wing Commander. His service record noted his exceptional contributions to aircraft evaluation and pilot training development, but made no specific mention of his combat innovations. By then, defensive energy management was standard technique taught to all fighter pilots, its origins lost to institutional memory. Civilian life brought work with Hawker aircraft as a test pilot and consulting engineer. MacLean evaluated early versions of the Hunter jet fighter and contributed to development of training aircraft designed specifically for jet conversion courses. His understanding of pilot psychology and aircraft handling characteristics made him valuable for designing training programs that reduced accident rates during the difficult transition to jet operations. The recognition came gradually and unofficially. Aviation historians researching the Battle of Britain began identifying the tactical innovations that had contributed to RAF victory. MacLean's name appeared in academic papers analyzing defensive fighter techniques. Former squadron mates, now airline pilots and aviation executives, credited his methods with saving their lives during combat. In 1965, the Royal Aeronautical Society invited MacLean to present a paper on energy management in fighter combat. The lecture, delivered to an audience of test pilots, engineers, and military historians, provided the first comprehensive technical analysis of the defensive techniques he had developed 25 years earlier. Survival in air combat, MacLean concluded, depends on understanding that aircraft are physics problems with wings attached. The pilot who calculates correctly has decisive advantage over the pilot who flies by instinct alone. The presentation generated significant interest among military aviation communities. NATO air forces requested copies of MacLean's technical analysis for incorporation into their fighter pilot training programs. The United States Air Force included his energy management principles in F-4 Phantom training courses. The techniques he had developed fighting for his life over Kent became standard doctrine for jet fighter pilots worldwide. MacLean died peacefully in 1978 at age 61, complications from heart surgery. His obituary in the Times mentioned his wartime service and post-war contributions to aviation safety, noting that his analytical approach to flight testing saved numerous lives through improved aircraft design and training procedures. The funeral was small but notable for the attendees. Air Chief Marshal Sir Christopher Foxley Norris represented the RAF officially. Former test pilots from Britain, America, and Canada served as pallbearers. Squadron leader Al Deere, MacLean's former commanding officer, delivered a eulogy that credited him with changing the way an entire generation of pilots thought about survival. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from an unexpected source. General Major Adolf Galland, former commander of German fighter forces, sent a letter to Mary MacLean expressing condolences and acknowledging her husband's tactical innovations. "Your husband," Galland wrote, "demonstrated that individual intelligence could overcome institutional doctrine. His methods cost German pilots many victories they believed certain." MacLean's personal papers, donated to the Imperial War Museum, revealed the analytical mind that had produced life-saving innovation. His combat logbooks contained detailed technical notes, sketch diagrams of energy management calculations, and systematic observations about German tactical behavior. The documents showed a man who approached aerial warfare as engineering problem requiring systematic solution. The principle endures in every military aviation training program worldwide. Student pilots learn energy management as fundamental skill, not knowing they're applying techniques developed by a Scottish engineering student fighting for his life in a supposedly hopeless aircraft over Kent in 1940. Modern fighter pilots flying F-35s and Eurofighter Typhoons use defensive maneuvering techniques that trace their lineage directly to MacLean's 4-minute engagement with 24 German fighters. The physics haven't changed. Energy management remains the foundation of tactical advantage. What MacLean discovered through desperate calculation has become scientific doctrine taught in flight schools from Nevada to Norfolk. The lesson transcends aviation. Individual innovation, applied systematically and shared effectively, can transform institutional capability. MacLean didn't redesign the Spitfire or rewrite tactical doctrine. He simply observed, calculated, and applied scientific principles to problems that others addressed through courage and hope. His legacy is visible every time a pilot survives impossible odds through calculated maneuvering rather than heroic instinct. Every defensive barrel roll, every energy-conserving turn, every precisely timed evasive maneuver carries forward the mathematical precision he demonstrated when survival depended on applied physics rather than applied courage. The aircraft are gone now. Our 6923 was scrapped in 1946, its aluminum recycled for civilian purposes. The airfields have become housing estates or industrial parks. The pilots have aged and died, taking their stories with them. But the knowledge persists. In squadron-ready rooms where young pilots prepare for combat, instructors still teach the fundamental lesson. Survival is a science. Calculate correctly, manage energy precisely, think 3 moves ahead. The enemy may have superior numbers, better equipment, more experience, but he cannot violate the laws of physics any more than you can. MacLean proved that in the 4 minutes that changed everything. The mathematics of survival, written in contrails over Kent, remain valid wherever aircraft fight for advantage in 3-dimensional space. Sometimes the greatest victories are not measured in enemies destroyed, but in principles discovered. Sometimes the most important innovations emerge not from laboratories or drawing boards, but from desperate necessity applied with scientific precision. And sometimes the difference between defeat and survival comes down to one pilot, one aircraft, and one moment of recognition that the impossible is merely the improbable calculated correctly. The sky remembers. The physics endure. The lesson continues. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.